Hi, I'm Kat, a partner at AlbionVC, and I'm here with Steve Toland, founder and CEO of TransFICC.
Hi Kat, thanks for having me.
Thank you, Steve. Albion first partnered with Steve and his team in 2020. Since then, we've supported TransFICC through multiple funding rounds as you've grown from virtually 3 co-founders into a global business, selling to multiple tier 1 banks and asset managers. Most recently, TransFICC announced a 25 million Series B, bringing total funding to over 50 million. And so today we're going to unpack what's behind that success, the lessons learned along the way, and a bit about what's next for TransFICC. So, Steve, to kick things off, can you tell us a little bit more about what TransFICC actually does for anyone less familiar?
Sure, but first off I'm going to say thank you for some money. Obviously, Citadel Securities led the Series B, but obviously having Albion in again and supporting us since like you have in the Series A and Series A extension, Series B again. So we're very grateful for Albion's support. So back to the question, what do TransFICC do? We build technology infrastructure for fixed income trading. I'll explain a little bit about what that is and the benefits we provide customers. But our customers are global banks, asset managers who might be running pension funds, etc., hedge funds, some exchanges. And all our customers effectively are trading instruments in fixed income. So that's mainly sort of bonds, government bonds or corporate bonds, but there's other things like interest rate swaps and repos, etc. And what the need of all those banks is and other customers is they have to connect to different electronic trading venues to trade those instruments. So you can't trade these things over the phone anymore. You've actually got to trade them electronically via computers. And that involves coding to different trading venues. You need to actually run physical circuits. You need infrastructure which is security compliant and also disaster tolerant, etc. So all that plumbing and infrastructure is what we try and provide for our customers to connect to these different trading venues to trade fixed income instruments. And the benefits that they get out of using our services that they can connect to more trading venues and more customers, so they've got more people to trade with, hopefully can trade at better prices. Our technology is pretty fast, so if you get to the marketplace early, you might see the better fruit at better prices. It's the same in fixed income. If you get to the market quicker, there's an opportunity to trade at better prices. So being able to trade in microseconds rather than milliseconds is one of the benefits that our software provides. And then there's a change going on in the market. Banks have to trade in an automated fashion. So humans aren't as quick as computers. So we help banks build automated trading technologies, and we also provide some automated trading components ourselves. So we're basically trying to help banks and asset managers and hedge funds basically have a trading infrastructure which makes it easier for them to trade fixed income infrastructure.
To start us off kind of in a bit more detail, I'd love to go back to sort of the origins of TransFICC and how it all began. So let's rewind a bit. And before TransFICC, you had a very successful career in FX sales at ICAP and Reuters and LMAX. What persuaded you to leave that world and start a business of your own? Well,
you've got to be a bit nuts to do a startup, as you know, but then obviously you invest in startups, so obviously, it was basically a sort of for me personally, it's something that sort of, it came about over time. So there's sort of different things that happened to me that sort of crystallized in, wanting to do a startup, but it wasn't one thing. So there was while I worked at ICAP, I left there in, end of 2011, and a bloke I knew from the market came to me and said, let's do a startup. And he didn't really have a business plan. And so I was like, I didn't go into business with him, but he then went off and founded a company on his own and raised a load of money and did quite well. And I was quite amazed that, what he did. And so I sort of saw, that happening. And then while I was working at LMAX, I discovered this sort of business problem of similar to what we're doing at TransFICC now, but I mean, the technology was changing to everyone had to code to APIs, and it was really expensive and really time consuming for banks to do that. So I found that I was spending more of my time at LMAX trying to solve this technology problem rather than sell my own product. And so that was, found a sort of business problem. And then I did go to a company called Market Factory, which I thought had a really good business model. But they had some issues with some technology, etc., and it didn't quite. So I went there and said, it didn't quite work. And so I then met a customer who said, I really want this business model, but I want it in fixed income. I didn't really know anything about fixed income, but after I'd spoken to enough customers who said, yeah, that's a business problem, and we want to buy that. If you can build it, we'll buy it. I then went and approached some of the guys that I'd worked with previously at LMAX and said, hey, look, I've got a really good business idea. Do you want to form a startup and do this? So sort of a combination of sort of factors of sort of getting more of a confidence to, it can, people can do this, start a company, etc. And then actually finding a business problem. And then actually it wasn't, the idea of TransFICC was not, my idea or Tom and Judd who I worked with. It was a customer. Customer came to us and said, I want to buy one of these. Can you build it? And so that the business idea came from the customer.
Yeah, so a combination of you found a real problem with real demand and you had a bit of an appetite brewing to maybe go start out on your own, and those two things came together.
Yeah, and a supportive wife, which is actually quite important, actually, because, it's a risk.
Yeah.
I said, we're going to put this much money into it and hopefully it's going to work, and one of the things when I meet other people who are thinking, of founding a company, I says like, is your wife or is your other half on board with this? Because it's like, to start with, you don't get paid. Yeah. It's sort of a risk, and you've got to factor that in. Yeah.
Yeah. And you just mentioned Tom and Judd, so you didn't found TransFICC entirely on your own. You have two co-founders. How did the gang get together initially?
Gang. So one of the things I did realise, and I found it like a business problem, and I went off to talk to lots of people who had founded companies, etc., and they all sort of said, you can't do it on your own, you need partners, it's tough. And so there was actually one of the things of working with we all worked together at LMAX. LMAX was the first place I actually worked where I actually saw developers in real life. We actually worked on the same trading floors. Everywhere else I'd worked, developers, salespeople were kept away from developers by like people are called product managers, and so I got to meet a few of the developers at LMAX, and I sort of met Tom and Judd, but didn't know them that well. But there was another guy I'd done quite a lot of work with, Dave Hounslow, who works with us part-time now to this day, actually. And I went to see him originally and said, look, I've got a business idea. Do you want to come into business with me and we can build all this, and what do you think? And he goes, I don't want to do that. I just want to work part-time now. But he goes, I do know that Tom and Judd are looking, they've got an idea of they'd like to do something entrepreneurial, and they're so they want to do a startup, but they're looking for a problem. And it sounds like you've got a problem. So we got together and I explained what the problem was, and we decided to, we had, it wasn't just one meeting. We had a few meetings and discussed it through. But we decided to, form TransFICC together. Yeah. And that was like 2016. Yeah,
it's a big decision choosing who your co-founders are going to be. What were you sort of looking for in a partner, I guess, then? How did you know that Tom, Judd, and yourself would kind of work well together?
One thing that I really wanted to do, and because I'd seen it at other technology companies, if you outsource your tech, you're not in control of your destiny. So you definitely want to build all the tech in-house. So we need people who can build tech. And then so I've said, talk to Dave and Tom and Judd, and obviously they knew how to build technology. And so that's, we wanted to build everything in-house. And so all technology decisions at TransFICC, I talk about it, but I can't make a tech decision. I mean, those guys know what they're doing. So they get on and make all the technology decisions. I try and, debate on their level, and I can see them rolling their eyes at times. But it is very much a they're bringing all the expertise together in terms of the type of technology we're using and also how you build it. So.
Yeah, fantastic. And I do want to spend a bit of time talking about the tech and the tech team in particular, but maybe we'll start talking about kind of the commercial engine and the go-to-market, which is obviously very much your domain. And so Something TransFICC has had to manage and has managed extremely well is what I'd say is arguably the most extreme end of complex enterprise sales. As we know, fixed income is a huge market with lots of tier one big banks, massive trading venues, and as you alluded to, quite entrenched, gigantic incumbent vendors as well. And so that's not easy territory for any company to navigate, never mind a fledgling startup in the early days. So can you tell us a little bit more about sort of how you won your first customers?
It's not easy, actually. I mean, it's not. So first off, we were. So obviously, I spent my whole career selling into banks, and so I know it's a sort of a complex process, and you got to deal with lots of people, and they don't always think rationally. There's lots of politics going on, and so there's lots of. And then in fixed income, you've got this added difficulty of it's mission critical software. Yeah. So one of the things, you can't go along and say, well, I've built a prototype. They can't use a prototype. They've got to actually use something that's robust. And so the way, I knew we were going to have to do this from day one is like, say, pretend to be a global company building mission critical software, even though not much of it is built from day one. But that's the approach we took. And so a couple of things we did was obviously day one, we hired someone to basically help us on a part-time basis with marketing. We need a website. We put a press release out on the first week to obviously get some coverage. Before, obviously, while Tom and Judd were trying to build a product or the first version of the product, I was out knocking on doors saying, this is the problem we're going to solve. What would you like to see? Which components did you want? So although we didn't have a product ready to go, I was engaging with customers to say, why don't you join us on this journey? We know you don't like the incumbent vendor, you want something different, so why don't you work with us on this? And then one of the things that is really difficult is all the banks say, well, have you got a customer yet? No one wants to be the first customer. Yeah. So we did it in stages. I found one bank, actually, guy in Canada. I spoke to him earlier this week, actually, but he said, this is actually a really good idea. We'll give you $25,000 to build a prototype. Okay, so not production trading, but you can use it to basically plug into two of the main trading venues and prove it sort of works. Well, that shows you've got a customer. It's not working in production, but you've got a customer. And then I took that to another bank and said, I've got a customer now. And they go, how much you pay for it? I said, I can't tell you that. That's under NDA. Okay, but they said, okay, all right, we'll give you some business, but we don't trust you to do trading yet. You can just do the market data. So it's not trading, but that was a real contract, production data over 2 years, etc. And then I was able to leverage that into a third customer and say, I've now got two customers. And they go, well, how much are they paying you and what they got? I said, I can't tell you all that, but there's two customers. Why don't you become a customer as well? And that third customer was Citi, who really sort of took us, invested in the product, invested in the company, and sort of really put a lot of focus into what they wanted us to build. And then obviously, then you've got credibility. So it came in sort of stages.
Yeah, I think there were quite a lot of pearls of wisdom in there that you probably had from your sales experience leading up to founding TransFICC that helped you navigate those early days. And a lot of the companies we work with, join our portfolio, of the companies that we typically tend to back at Albion are selling into enterprise sales and probably don't come in with the sales DNA that you have, but are still kind of trying to win those first customers. So I guess what would be the key one or two tips perhaps that you would give to those sort of companies for getting going for the first time?
So you've got to be trying to sell it from day one.
Yeah.
Even if you haven't got it, you've got to try and sell it and say. And the second thing I'd say is when the bank says, "Oh yeah, we'll give you a POC," the immediate answer to that is that's useless to me. I don't need a POC. I need a customer. Okay, and to be a customer, you've got to pay me some money. Otherwise, I'm going to go to the next guy. You're wasting my time, and we're not building a POC free of charge. because you need a paying customer.
Yeah.
And you just need to keep focused on that and keep knocking on doors. So that, and then you've got to. It depends. Obviously, our stuff is different, but we knew that we were selling mission critical software into global banks, and so you just got to put all the things that you need to have, start putting them in place from day one. So I knew that to get through bank procurement, we're going to have a disaster recovery policy. So one of the things on my to-do list from day one was to write a disaster recovery policy. It's not because I know I can't get a bank contract until I've got one. So got to tick that box. And so our first disaster recovery policy looked remarkably like some health authority in the west coast of England. I found it online, but I copied that, But when the procurement people called up and said, "Yeah, this is a DR policy. You need a security policy," just to basically, you don't want to be going to banks and saying to them, "Well, yeah, we're a startup and we haven't got any money and we've only got 2 developers and we haven't got a product yet." They're not going to buy anything. You've got to put out this sort of thing that we can solve all your problems. You just need to sign up. But some of it is, it's flogging stuff.
Yeah, not to be underestimated. And then even with your sales DNA, you've been working with one of Albion's go-to-market operating partners, Julian Johnson. What's the value of having a sounding board like Julian, even when sales is already your core strength?
Because Julian, he's got much more experience than I have. Because I've sold software into banks and brokerage services into banks most of my career. But Julian's actually done more enterprise software sales for companies like Microsoft and SAP, etc. So so we both come from, if you like, sort of we're salespeople. But where he's really helped us in things like, I sort of say I want to have a strategic account manager and we want to have some, a matrix sales organization. We both know what we're talking about, but we actually can't afford it yet. The company's too small. Yeah. We don't have enough customers. And so it's been quite good talking with Julian about, well, who are the right people, and how can we try and sort of navigate what we have now and with the resources that we have now. And he helps us with recruiting, sounding board to help recruit people as well, etc., and helps run things like pipeline, etc. So it's like we've got a second enterprise sales expert working alongside myself.
Yeah. And probably quite helpful to have some company when the team is very overwhelmingly engineering heavy still today, especially at the beginning.
When Albion first invested back in 2020, I was the only person doing sales. Obviously we were starting to recruit, and so it was really useful to have someone on board to sort of help with that sort of recruitment process.
Yeah, and so I'd love to talk a little bit more broadly about the team. From the beginning, I know you've been very intentional about sort of the culture and the people that you're bringing into the business. Can you describe TransFICC's culture today?
So I think there's a couple of things. I can't take any credit for this on the engineering side. So it's an engineering culture. A lot of things that were, if like the sort of practices and how to build the software, were in place at LMAX. And so there's a few of our team actually, obviously myself, Tom and Judd worked at LMAX, and there's other members of the team came from LMAX. So we pulled some of that engineering culture, if you like, best practice, as it were, that was in place at LMAX, and so we need to do that here. And then I'll just say, I can't tell who's a good software developer and who's a bad software developer because I can't code a lick. But Tom and Judd are obviously been very good at making sure they hire the best people, and so obviously hiring good quality engineers, making sure those people are team players, and then we've got. One of the things that we've got culture-wise, I know you're familiar with this, but we do this thing called pair programming on the developer side. So developers don't put their headphones on and work on their own. They have to work in a pair on the same piece of code. And that means they're talking to each other all day. And one of the things I didn't actually realize till recently is I thought, well, one pair would work on one problem till it was done, or, one feature, or they don't. They tend to rotate every 2-3 days. So everybody's working with everybody pretty much all the time. And so there's no, how can I put it, there's no sort of siloed domain knowledge, like there's only one dev who knows about this one thing. The idea is that everybody knows about how the whole software system works. So there's lots of communications, lots of collaboration, very open. And then obviously, since we went remote in sort of COVID lockdown, and before that we had everyone in the office every day. Because we were doing this pair programming communication thing. It's like, then we then go remote. But we keep this thing of, well, I think it's actually very useful. We have everybody in the company on what we call a stand-up meeting every morning at 9:30. So, and it's not just the developers, it's the salespeople and people in finance and HR, etc. And we're all on, and we all just quickly go around the room. Obviously it's a virtual room, but 40 odd people, etc. And everyone just says hello and what they did yesterday. And so it's a 10-minute call, but you feel part of the whole organisation. If I'm working in the US, I'm on the wrong time zone. I can't join that call, and I feel actually I'm missing out.
Yeah.
So that's very good for basically keeping a sort of an open, communicative culture, etc. Yeah.
So can you share a little bit more about how that actually works in practice? So you have your stand-ups. Everyone says something, and I guess any more about how pair programming works in practice? Because again, a lot of our founders and a lot of our teams have in-office cultures now post-COVID, and they've kind of returned back to it, and others have distributed teams. And I think TransFICC does this so well. And so any tips that you can share for actually how you do things in practice, or anything you'd recommend other founders implement if they're still trying to work remotely most of the time?
So the caveat I will say is if anyone sees this, particularly any of the developers, they're going to go, Steve, why are you talking about programming? You don't know what you're talking about. But anyway, I do sit alongside these guys and see a lot of it. So, let's talk through the day. Actually, we have this kickoff meeting at the start of the day with everybody. So we quickly, hello, how are you all doing? Then people break into their separate teams. So we have a sales team has their stand-up meeting with sales team. We actually have ours prior. We have it earlier, have ours at 8:30. But most of the engineering teams will then break into a team of sort of 6. And then the team lead will basically say, okay, what did we work on yesterday? What are we going to be working on today? Who's going to be pairing with who? Okay, and they do that in a group. So we, typically 6 in a group, and there's obviously, we've got 4 development teams, and there's a networks and operations team, etc. It's also a customer support team, and then they will then break down into their pairs. So the idea is people won't normally work on their own. They'll normally be in a pair, but sometimes there's not enough people. Some do have to go on their own. But the default is that people will be pairing, and they will work together all day together. So no one is, if you like, particularly on the engineering side, working on their own for a day. I mean, they are talking to people the whole day. And then the pair programming is actually quite interesting. And I'll say this from a non-developer type. So the idea is, it's pair programming, it's also test-driven development. So the idea is, say they've got to write a line of code for a software feature, etc. Before they write that line of code, they've got to write a test, and the test will prove that line of code does, So if I'm logging on to something, is there a light gone on or something? Can I actually see that it's logged on? So they're going to write a test. They write the test first, and then they write the piece of code which is, solves the problem or whatever. And that new line of code will be run against the test that they've just written, but also every test that we've ever written since day one of TransFICC. So thousands and thousands of tests, which are all on this big green dashboard, okay, and that is being monitored by one developer every day called the Sheriff, and his idea is to keep an eye on the dashboard, and if any pair have written a new line of code which is causing tests to break elsewhere, he prods them and said, well, you've got to fix this quickly, okay, and if they can't fix it quickly because it's causing multiple problems, they then have it's called an embargo is put on. No one can commit any code until this problem is fixed. And what they typically do is they they sort of revert. They just basically, well, that new line of code is obviously causing problems elsewhere. Let's take it out and think about it again. Yeah. But what that means is everything works all the time. There's no bugs. So we release to customers every single day. So it takes, what this pair programming and test-driven development does is it takes a little bit longer to write the code, but you have full quality built in, and you actually release much more regularly to customers. And so from a salesperson perspective, I've never been shouted at by a customer at TransFICC to say your shit doesn't work. And every place I worked at before, that's what I had to do. I had to go and see customers to apologize about the last software release. Don't have that. We didn't have that at LMAX. We didn't have that at TransFICC. So that pair programming process builds quality into the system, which is wonderful from a
Yeah. So
it takes. Yeah. It looks like you've got two people to write every line of code, and that feels more expensive up front. But it's the investment is worth it because no one's spending time fixing bugs at TransFICC. I mean, they're all writing new code.
So your trade-off, sort of the pace of delivery, but the quality bar is so high, and given that you're providing mission-critical infrastructure, that's sort of the core metric you need to be driven by.
It's really interesting, actually. So we have big customers. I can probably guess their names. They sit on our board. But they say, like, you've got to make this delivery by the end of the month, or we're going to kill you, because we're a bank, and that's how we talk. But with test-driven development, the software will be ready when it's ready. It's passed every test, etc. So what happens is, we deliver maybe 1 or 2 days late, but it all works, and so that, over time, the customers get really happy that, well, actually, I don't have to call you in to shout at you. So, but there is that trade-off that sometimes you can't quite predict exactly how long it's going to take to build something because everything's got to work.
Yeah, and I can vouch for the number of times the same people around the board have commented on the quality of delivery, the uptime, the ability for TransFICC to stand behind all of their SLAs on the flip side. And I think would prefer the other way around.
Bringing back to the sales culture, so day one, we drafted a contract for customers. We put in a service level agreement that said that we were going to be up 99.9% of the time, or we put in the contract, we said the software fees they were paying for us, they would get a rebate. And then literally every bank we went to, and they read through this, and they go, you can commit to this. And I go, yep. And they go, okay, we'll take your SLA as is. I mean, so nearly every bank has taken our service level agreement because they said it's better than any other vendors given us. But obviously you've got to build the code in the right way, and you've got to have a track record and be confident it's going to work.
Yeah, I mean, it speaks volumes for a company being able to have the confidence in those early days to stand behind something like that. And again, testament to the culture and the intention that
and that's and I don't write any of the code, so I'm not responsible for any of this good quality stuff. Is we're up to about 40 engineers now, and they're a bunch of really clever guys. And ladies, there's a few ladies.
I think you can really see that in the culture. I've met most of the team now and spent time with them, and you can tell how kind of committed and excited the team is to be working at TransFICC, and also just the quality of people in the room. The bar is so high, and I think it's a testament to you and Tom and Judd for the culture that you have built from that perspective.
So for all the engineers, I talk a good game on how it all works. I don't hire any of the developers. So Tom and Judd take full credit, and then not just them now. Actually, obviously we've got other people interviewing now as the team's grown, and so that the standard of the quality of the people in the engineering team really comes from those guys, etc.
Yeah, and you've also, it's really interesting to see sort of as a leadership team, the three of you came together in those early days. You had a lot of faith that you'd be able to work well together in complementary skill sets. I guess, how has the relationship between the three of you as founders evolved over that time? Has it, you've had a lot of trust clearly in each other from the start, and you know each other's, you know which domain you each own, but how's that evolved?
So things have changed actually because we've grown as a company. The first when it was like the three of us, and Dave part-time coming in, or when we had to go and see a customer and say, Dave, I need to show up today. So we look like 25% bigger company. In the early days, I mean, really, Tom and Joe were head down trying to build a prototype, and I was out knocking on doors trying to sell. So we were like, we'd meet up every day, but we were but we weren't having to manage people or do all those type of things. What's evolved into more now is obviously I'm still very much focused on talking to customers and revenue, getting money in the door, whether that is from customers or from investors, etc. Judd is much more on the architecture of the system and talking with customers and say, what should we be building and how it should work. So as the product line has sort of expanded, very much Judd has sort of led that sort of side of things, and particularly building data center infrastructure. Actually building data centers overseas in COVID, I was like, I don't know how we're going to do this. Judd was like, I'm going to build it in my front room first, and then I'm going to ship it all out. I was like, okay. So he's very much the sort of technology architecture side of things, and then Tom is very much, I'd call it operations. So sort of running the factory in terms of what we're building, who's building it, who's maintaining it, etc. And so that's much more, and that's sort of how we sort of evolved into, while we all talk, we talk to each other all the time about, decisions on hiring, etc., and things like that. That's where each of us focuses. And we agonise over hiring decisions. We've still not yet hired anyone at TransFICC which hasn't been interviewed by all three founders.
Why is that important to you, and how do you think that's going to change going forward?
Well, so you're going to get to a stage where you can't. We've got to. We're not going to be able to interview everybody we hire at TransFICC as there'll come a stage where that doesn't scale enough. I think we've got enough other people on the teams that we trust that and we've actually managed to build a culture of some of the stuff we talked about, on the engineering side, and making sure we hire good people who are going to be team players, etc. I think there's enough of the sort of culture in place that other people could do that without, and we trust them. What we are going to have to sort of think about is not growing too quick. So you've just given us some more money, thank you again, and that it will enable us over sort of 5 years to essentially double the size of the company. But you can't double the size of the company overnight. You'd have too many people coming in who don't know how things work. So you've got to, particularly with engineers, you've got to hire them at a certain rate of progress and make sure that they learn how the systems work and they're supported, etc. You can't have two people starting the same day and have them pairing with each other. It's not going to work.
Yeah.
So there's a rate of, if you like, scale up we can go at.
Yeah. And I think you've always said, and we've always agreed, that for TransFICC it's about playing the long game, and it's not a market that rewards shortcuts in any case. How important is it for you that your investors share that mindset?
I think very important, actually. One of the things, it was actually quite interesting in the last sort of fundraising round. So we're talking to lots of different types of investors, and you can tell that some investors, whether they're looking at AI or whatever, but they're sort of expecting that you're going to, tell us how you're doubling sales every year. Now we've never doubled sales any year since we started, and as far as I'm aware, any company selling anything into capital markets doesn't grow that fast. It's just, that's because the customers take too long to make decisions. It's and so you need to have investors who understand the capital market space and are comfortable with that very long, lumpy sales process. But obviously, there's a counter to that. We've never had a customer cancel. So it's very sticky, etc. And as long as your software works, it tends to grow over time. But you need to have investors who understand the long sales cycle, and if you go 2 months without making a sale, they're not going to be sort of like pounding the table and say, what the hell are you doing about this? Let's try something different. some of it is you've just got to understand how the market works. So long-term investors is important to us.
Yeah. And speaking of investment, huge congratulations again on the recent Series B.
Thank you.
What does that unlock for TransFICC?
So one of the things, so we're competing in sort of technology infrastructure, particularly on the bank side, against only 2 or 3 other vendors. There's not many in the space, but to successfully compete, you've pretty much got to have the full product set. So without boring people about fixed income, but fixed income is, government bonds, corporate bonds, interest rate swaps, repos, munis, there's a lot of stuff, and you need to build a lot of sort of product components across all those asset classes. So we've built a load of those components, but we sort of need to build everything. So having the investment enables us to sort of build out more. But then it also, what it does is the market is changing. Mentioned it early on, the market is getting much more automated. So we can build more automated trading products. So I think it makes us more attractive in a changing market. And then what was interesting as well is obviously lead investor is Citadel Securities. So Citadel Securities are a big name in capital markets. You could maybe argue that they're one of the most punchy names there is. So if you look at the US equity market, no retail person in the US pays to trade stocks anymore. It's all free. Now, partly of that is done by applications like Robinhood, but a lot of it, if you look behind it and look what's happened to the changing market infrastructure in equities in the US, you see Citadel Securities. They are 20 to 25% of the US equity market volume is going through them. They want to move into fixed income. So as part of, when the day they invested in us, they also put a press release to talk about their ambitions in the fixed income market, and they want to be a very successful market maker in the fixed income market. So that obviously, us working with them as a technology provider is hugely good for us in terms of sort of branding and profile. Obviously we've got some great investors already with like Citi and HSBC. But Citadel have got a real reputation for bringing technology solutions to markets. And so I think that really helps us as well. Hopefully will take us to the next level.
Yeah. And so with that, where do you see TransFICC, where do you see the company going from here over the next few years and beyond?
Well, hopefully making you a good return on your investment. So my sort of sales background actually is I don't like this investor thing about, what's the moonshot? Because actually I've got to make next year's target first. I've got to stay alive next year and get some sales in the door. So let's focus on it. So we want to be, if you like, technology infrastructure leaders in the fixed income market. So, we're really, recognized as good technology partners for anyone who's trading fixed income, whether they're a bank or an asset manager, etc. They go, TransFICC helps us to connect to more venues, helps us get regulated, helps us automate our trading. Basically it helps us solve some of those technology problems. So that, and if we're recognized as the sort of the technology leader by most of those players, sales will naturally grow. So that's it's basically growing the company as the market evolves and growing with our customers. That's what we want to try and do.
So I guess what would success look like?
I think us to have a 50% market share of technology being provided, infrastructure technology being provided in our marketplace, which is a pretty big market actually. So that's depending on how you count the numbers, but it's billions of dollars a year. But I think we can, potentially we could capture that, and also provide very good value for money for our customers. I mean, there is some very expensive solutions out there at the moment in the sort of hosting space. In main incumbent vendor we compete with now. For banks building it themselves, it's very expensive to build all this stuff. So I think we can provide pretty good value for money, and hopefully obviously grow our revenues as well. I haven't given you a number.
Don't need to give a number. We're super excited for the journey ahead and the journey that we've had with you already. Lots to be looking forward to and a lot of big ambition there in the journey. So that just leaves me to say thank you so much for joining us today, sharing a little bit about the story so far, and thank you for having Albion on the journey with you.
Okay, thanks very much. Thanks.